Sunday, I share with you whatever wisdoms I've gleaned from our collective readings. And most Sundays, one or two of you let me know the sermon has reached you in your heart and that it has helped you understand anew. So James is asking the followers of the way, right, the new Christianity, this new brand of Judaism, to consider the fruits of their living. Last Sunday, we rooted around in the taming of the tongue. Carrying forward to this week, we may be able to see that gentleness and wisdom will surely correct the mistakes of the tongue. Maybe even prevent those mistakes from happening. Because our words are surely the fruits of our heart. This week, we will talk of taming the passions of the heart, which are directly linked to those fruits of the tongue. I will tell you this has been a most difficult reading for me to unpack, and I have shared that with some people, so we're going to see how we do here. James says, "Is my job each day is asking his flock to consider the way it lives." I guess we could say, are we living in harmony with God, or are we living in harmony with the world? Because when we live in harmony with God, we are always slightly out of step with the world. The justice the world delivers shouldn't always sit well with us. Sometimes the rules of the world are cruel and harsh in a way that a God of mercy and grace would not look favorably upon. So let's talk about what makes a good life. Jesus is asking us to walk a different path. How many times have we heard that said? Maybe it just slides out of our consciousness because it just sounds too pat at this point. But in our first hymn this morning, we sang, "I surrender all." And that is the point. We are asked to surrender all of our vanity, our greed, our jealousies, our perfectionism, because it all boils down to one thing that James has artfully understood: envy. The definition of envy, according to theologian Frederick Buechner, he says, envy is the consuming desire to have everybody else as unsuccessful as are you. That was a good one. Our American capitalist culture does nothing to aid us against an envious heart. It does everything to cause us to envy one another. Envy causes us to buy certain products, to drive certain trucks, to talk about one another unkindly because of how they look, or how they talk, or how they walk. Envy makes us afraid we'll be left out, and not left out in the rapture kind of way, just left behind. Envy goes deeper than the afterlife. It is a part of our everyday present life. Where I think envy most disrupts our lives is when tragedy falls upon our doorstep. Perhaps not in the initial stages of shock, but as shock begins to wear, we wonder, why me? This might not at first blush seem a question born of envy. However, if we turn that around to when truly good things happen in our lives, is the question first off our lips, why me? To be truthful, that isn't the first thought to come to my mind. I may be grateful for the gift that has fallen into my lap, but rarely do I meet the gift with, why? Now I admit we're coming to a tricky place where we can talk about the providence of God, that all good and bad things are so because God has made them. And I want to remind us that God gave us free will. And when we were created, our DNA and our cells were also blessed with that free will to behave in the manner that they ought. But we know that we don't always behave in the manner we ought, and sometimes to great and sad consequence, neither do ourselves or our DNA. As the children are learning in their Sunday school classes this month, God did create everything. God did create everything and set it on its path, then let it take its course. Things like disease set in when areas become highly populated. See, we were meant to be gatherers and hunters, gardeners and hunters for our food. And once the Industrial Revolution came along in the 1800s, we know that people were forced from their lands and into the cities. Cholera, smallpox, typhus were the most dreaded and predominant diseases. These diseases could not have spread as they did if not for poor sanitation, including unclean water sources. Disease spread because of overpopulated areas, not properly prepared for the number of inhabitants on the land. The bubonic plague, the Black Death, was the result of, they now know, not rats, as they once suspected, but likely from human lice and ticks. Overcrowding was the source of epidemic disease. So epidemic spread of disease that caused 25 million deaths occurred due to human activity. Now we live with the curse of the number one killer, which is, can anybody tell me? Do you know what it is? Heart disease. Generally the work of human inactivity. We have made life in some ways too easy to be complacent. Heart disease in America is the number one reason for deaths. Heart disease can certainly be caused by genetic factors, as I well know, my mom had heart disease, but the sharp rise in heart disease is mostly due to the factors of diabetes, overweight and obesity, poor diet, physical inactivity, excessive alcohol use. And I would include one more, excessive work. I have never seen people work like Americans. And when I say Americans, I mean those of you in the United States. And there is just not enough time for play or relaxation. These symptoms produce the fruits of our "you can have it all" ethos. We are told we can eat whatever we want and take antacids for the tummy upset, then blood pressure medicine when the problem becomes more severe. Our television screens bring in a plethora of entertainment so that even I find it hard to get off my fanny and get out and do something, even engage in one of my very favorite activities, which is cooking good homemade food. Our food is fast. Our bodies are becoming more and more slow to a place where we sit all day long. This equals a devastating lifestyle to the body that God gave each one of us. Having it all does not offer a good life. The question I posed at the beginning of the sermon was, are we living in harmony with God, or are we living in harmony with the world? So what I am offering is, many bad things that we attribute to God are often caused by human behavior and human activity. We can't pawn it all off on God. That's just sneak-going. All right, so Professor James Boyce enlightens us on how wisdom and goodness produce a good life that is counter to our cultural norms. He claims, actually the reading is simply continuing the reflection on true and false wisdom that encompasses the central portion of the epistle, the letter of James. As usual, the answer that comes is simple and direct. Good works are the mark of one who possesses wisdom. In so many words, you will know wisdom by its fruits. As usual, the author of James's theology is practical and down to earth. Precisely because wisdom's insights are so practical about doing things, readers with a religious interest are often prone to shun its insights or to cast aside as not particularly theological. But that is the way of wisdom. Its insights are indeed very theological, i.e. they are about God and God's relation to us as creation. Wisdom assumes that because wisdom is the supreme gift of God to humans, reflection on the religious life and what it means to live in relation to God is always going to be very practical. The gifts of God have an immediate and very practical purpose. They intend and point to a fullness of life exercised in a disciplined love and care for the neighbor. Spirituality is not a matter of escape from this world. No, it isn't. But it is to be exercised and most visible in a healthy life of interaction with the day-to-day affairs of life. James's reading tells us we have all that we need. So here's what the lection left out of today's reading. It isn't a part of next Sunday's reading either, and I feel it's important for us to hear. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Cry out in sorrow, mourn and weep. Let your laughter become mourning, and your joy become sadness. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. Brothers and sisters, don't say evil things about each other. Whoever insults or criticizes a brother or sister insults and criticizes the law. That is the law of love. If you find fault with the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge over it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, and he is able to save and to destroy. But you who judge your neighbor, who are you? The next verse is titled, Warning the Proud and Wealthy. Pay attention, you who say, today and tomorrow we will go to such and such a town. We will stay there a year, buying and selling and making a profit. You ready? All right. Many of these things we have spoken of over the last weeks. I know that we have. These are the things that as humans we have chased after for thousands of years. We have already tackled the tongue, as I said, but we have to look at the painful legacy of profit making. The story of Abram and his father-in-law show us what profit manipulation looks like. Over and over again, Abram was told that he had to remain on with Terah in order to marry his daughter Sarai. The Terah was building wealth upon the back of Abram's clever work. As Christians, we ask ourselves, when we profit, who doesn't? As Christians, we ask ourselves, when we profit, who doesn't? Profit, the enslavement of people. That too has been going on since time immemorial. Consider the Israelites enslaved by the Egyptians. Eventually, theirs was the freedom story of Exodus. In the American South, slaves with rags upon their backs, children sold as property to other owners. Well, they sang their hymns to God, a God that hadn't yet delivered them from their pain. A sign of true faith hanging on when deliverance hasn't yet arrived. That is also, contrary to human belief, one of the signs of a good life. So we'll hear the hymn, Closer Walk With Me, this morning, sung by Dean Johnson and Connie. This hymn, the title and lyrics of which allude to the biblical passage from 2 Corinthians, we walk by faith, not by sight. And from James 4:8, which I just read, come near to God, and he will come near to you. These passages illustrate that even when we suffer, God is near. We walk by faith through our darkness. In our darkness, we surrender all. We surrender to the goodness and wisdom that is peace of God. God keeps us centered in the midst of our storms, ready to hear the word that could only be the truth, uttered by the Holy Spirit. We respond out of God's wisdom and goodness when we are centered. After much thoughtful consideration, Martin Luther King Jr. chose to respond to the needs of all of those with little power through through non-violent resistance. This kind of action is the product of God's wisdom and goodness, uplifting the neighbor who doesn't share in the same rights as we do, and making that happen through multiple non-violent interactions. If we share, the world tells us, we will not have enough. This is the very nature of jealousy rearing up and raising its ugly green head. Its putrid breath falls upon us and infects us with its stench. Envy. Jesus spent 3 years telling us we do have enough as he moved about bringing people into community. I heard this morning during the Bible study that they were talking about the woman at the well and how Jesus brought her back into community. He didn't judge her, he just said, do what's right. Come on back in. That is God's justice. Over and over again, the Bible tells us not to worry, to be generous and hospitable. It is God's way. And theologian Margaret Amer offers this. James ends this passage with a series of recommendations for those caught up in worldly wisdom rather than godly wisdom. It says, therefore be subject to God, but resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. Why? Why will God draw near to you if you draw near to God? Because God's already there, right? God is always there. These verses issue a call to repentance, to turning away from the jealousies and resentments of the world at large toward the peaceful leadership of those full of godly wisdom. So I know that I have given us a lot to ponder this morning, and hopefully for the entire week. We live in a time where temptation to envy is everywhere. It is genuinely a pattern built into our commercial culture. It has sugar-fed us to the idea that we have a right to have it all. That is, unless, of course, we follow the law of love. So, of course, this sermon has been about personal holiness and living a good life. But what about us as a church community? From what worldly so-called wisdom might James be calling the church to repent? So I'll ask these questions. What might it mean for the church once more to draw near to God? And are we living in harmony with God, or are we living in harmony with the world? And I'll leave us with this.